All right, today we are diving deep into a topic that has just been exploding since the Jeffrey Epstein files were released. We're going to break down the claims from a Substack article by The Truth About Cancer. They argue that these documents are basically a smoking gun that connects Epstein, Bill Gates, and a pre-planned pandemic. So let's get into the evidence they've laid out.
The source material kicks off with this really powerful statement, and it completely sets the tone for their entire argument. This isn't just about the facts for them, it's about this feeling of vindication. It's the belief that after years of being called conspiracy theorists, these new documents finally prove they were right all along.
And this image? Well, it visualizes the core theory that the article presents. The authors are contending that the pandemic wasn't some random act of nature, but a manufactured crisis. And its purpose? To bring in what they call a biosecurity state. Basically, a system of global surveillance and control over our personal health and our finances. According to their analysis, the Epstein files lay out the entire blueprint. So let's get into that first part of their argument, this whole idea of vindication. Why do they see these files as such a massive turning point? A huge piece of this narrative is the theme of suppression. The authors say that for years, any time they warned about powerful elites, they were systematically censored and just labeled misinformation. But the Epstein files, in their view, aren't just new information. They're the hard evidence that validates everything they were trying to say all along.
Okay, now let's move on to the first major piece of evidence the article gets into, this alleged working partnership between Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Gates.
According to the source, the official stories we've heard, about Gates regretting a few meetings, well, they say that doesn't even begin to tell the whole story. They argue these weren't just some casual dinners or chats about charity. They frame them as high-level, strategic sessions for a much, much bigger agenda. The Substack piece really zeroes in on the specific language used in an email from 2015. It points to two key phrases, preparing for pandemics, and the sign-off, I hope we can pull this off. The authors present this wording as just eerily predictive.
And here it is. This is the email the article showcases, where you can see the subject line and the text we just talked about. For the authors of this piece, this is no coincidence. This is Exhibit A in their case for a long-term, coordinated plan a full 5 years before the COVID-19 pandemic even happened.
From there, the authors connect that 2015 email directly to Event 201. Now, this was a real pandemic simulation held in October 2019, just a couple of months before the outbreak. It was co-hosted by the Gates Foundation, and it specifically modeled a global coronavirus pandemic. The article presents the timing as just way too perfect to be a coincidence.
So from pandemic planning, the article then shifts its focus to what it calls the financial architecture humming away behind the scenes. They claim these emails reveal not just a plan, but a full-blown business model for vaccines.
Now, the article goes even further back in the timeline, all the way to 2011. It highlights an email exchange between Epstein and executives at JP Morgan, and they're allegedly discussing the architecture for a massive, multi-billion-dollar philanthropic fund for Bill Gates.
This right here is a key quote the piece pulls from that 2011 exchange, and the language is pretty unambiguous: more money for vaccines. The source argues this shows the fund's purpose wasn't just simple charity, but was specifically designed to raise capital targeted at vaccines. And here's the screenshot of the email provided by the source, which highlights that exact phrase. The article presents this as concrete proof that nearly a decade before COVID-19, financial machinery was being designed with vaccines as a central goal. But wait. It gets even more specific. According to the source, a follow-up email from Epstein a month later had this line in it, which the authors find particularly damning: the recommendation of an offshore arm specifically for the vaccine part of the fund.
This is the second email the source points to as evidence of a really sophisticated financial strategy. The mention of an offshore arm for what's supposed to be a charitable vehicle, well, that's presented as a huge red flag, suggesting a motive that's maybe more about profit and avoiding taxes than just public health.
So, let's just put it all together on a timeline to see how they build their case. It starts in 2011 with the financial blueprint for a vaccine fund. Then it moves to 2015 with emails talking about pandemic prep, then to late 2019 with that Event 21 simulation, and it's followed almost immediately by the actual pandemic in 2020. You can see how this chronology is absolutely central to their argument of a premeditated plan.
The narrative then takes another turn. The source argues that trying to expose this alleged plan came at a huge personal and professional cost, which leads us to what they call the censorship playbook.
So right here, the article draws a direct line between two different forms of alleged protection. It claims that the same network of media, government, and tech institutions that they say shielded Epstein's associates for years, well, that same network was weaponized during the pandemic to deplatform and silence anyone who dared to question the official narrative.
This slide really illustrates the conflict from their perspective. On one side, you have a social media post they say was a key reason they got banned. On the other, a representation of the mainstream consensus. For them, this contrast represents a war between independent truth-tellers and a coordinated, narrative-controlling machine.
And this really gets to the heart of their grievance. The authors argue that while figures like Gates and Fauci were celebrated and companies like Pfizer were protected, critics who raised early questions were just systematically attacked, demonetized, and pretty much erased from the public conversation.
So this all leads to the article's conclusion about the ultimate goal. What was the point of this entire alleged scheme? Well, they call it the biosecurity state agenda. The writers argue that the pandemic was never really just about a virus. They say it was the catalyst for a much larger agenda. They claim it was used to justify and speed up the rollout of systems like digital IDs, programmable money, and vaccine passports, all tools they see as creating a framework for total social control.
And this image from their article really visualizes that fear. It's meant to depict a future where your ability to even participate in society, to buy things, sell things, or even move around, is tied to a digital identity that's controlled by some central authority, and it's all based on your compliance. So, to wrap this all up, the source article presents a pretty clear chronological narrative. It uses Epstein's emails as the thread, connecting a financial blueprint for vaccines to a pre-planned pandemic and, ultimately, a global control agenda. For them, it's total vindication. And this leaves us with a final question to think about. What is the line between connecting the dots and creating a conspiracy?